Hello and welcome to this video on FM Zone from ToyBox. I'm Alex from Attack, and no, there's no need to adjust your speakers, this is my real accent. FM Zone is an FM-based synth that dishes up powerful basses and leads, suitable for pretty much any electronic genre. It can also do some really great pads and sequences that will appeal to techno heads and sound designers alike, and all in a really easy-to-use interface that can be as simple or as complex as you like. In case you're not familiar with FM synthesis, let's put on a Wham t-shirt, comb our flock of seagulls' hair, and trust Frankie when he says relax. Because FM first appeared on our cultural radar in the early 80s, and helped redefine the sound of popular music and movie soundtracks, and even played a noteworthy, but often unnoted, part in the birth of house and techno. Where subtractive synths take some harmonically rich waveforms and then shave and manipulate frequencies from those to create the final sound, FM synthesis works by modulating waves with each other to make all new and exciting harmonics. And that's where we get the name. FM stands for frequency modulation. In the 80s, the waves, or frequencies, usually came in the form of harmonically boring sine waves, modulating each other to create richer, more complex sounds. This gave a very different sonic palette to traditional subtractive synthesis. Now, right at the forefront of this 80s digital FM revolution was Yamaha, and FM Zone is sonically inspired by 80s Yamaha classics, in particular the TX-81Z. The TX-81 was basically a keyboardless DX-11, and the DX-11 was basically a slightly grittier multi-timbral DX-7, and the DX-7 was probably the best-selling synth of the 80s, if not all time. And those FM synths introduced some great and iconic noises that we still revere today, and most of which are right here in FM Zone. House bass, R&B ready electric piano, those bell sounds you heard on countless 80s action movie soundtracks. The list really is long and distinguished, and instantly distinguishable from other synthesis types. But you needed a PhD from MIT to program classic FM synths, so you picked a sound, and you played a sound. FM Zone, though, is designed to encourage people of any experience level to tweak, perform, and even program patches from scratch. It has a much more playful, Eurorack modular feel to it, specifically a West Coast synthesis vibe. Now, I know West Coast synthesis sounds a bit weird. You expect to see a bunch of long-haired synths sitting around in surf shorts smoking purple haze. But it's actually not that. Basically, the West Coast approach is slightly unconventional, with stuff like creatively stacked up oscillators, FM, cross modulations, the kind of things we're used to seeing in the modern Eurorack scene. The opposite is East Coast synthesis, which most people think of as meaning more bread and butter subtractive. So about 90% of all the big synths released for the last 50 years. Honestly though, the lines are pretty vague, and if you're determined to find out more, Googling it is good for at least 20 minutes of top tier time wasting. So, what's so West Coast about FM Zone then? Well, it's based around two sound engine modules, one FM and the other sample-based. And all the key performance and quick soundcraft and controls are split across just 9 easy-to-grasp sections, each with its own dedicated envelope. First up, we've got controls for pitch and subtone, shape and detuning of your operators, the amount and type of FM happening, the timbre, a choice of 18 different filter types from classic 4-pole and meticulously modeled Oberheim style to wave folders and vowel formats, level and extra distortion, sample pitch and detuning, sample filtering, and finally, sample level and some additional FM modulations from that sub-oscillator. So unlike the iconic FM synths of the 80s, which were impenetrable because they hid all their controls behind a tiny 32-character alphanumeric screen, and also unlike many modern FM soft synths, which are impenetrable because they show you all their controls, FM Zone strikes a really clever balance. And this balance extends to the core sound design elements too. It offers up preset sonic building blocks, so pretty much anybody can have fun tweaking or creating entirely new sounds, no matter their experience level. Because the complexity level of the instrument is only ever what you want it to be. From loading a preset and turning a knob, safe in the knowledge it'll do something cool and usable, to deep diving right down to the lowest micro-programming detail. In this sense, it follows on from ToyBox's other great boutique virtual instruments, the versatile and creative polysynth Buzz Zone, and their tasty little kick instrument, Thump 1. By the way, if you haven't tried Thump 1, I only just discovered it myself, and it's not just a tasty little kick instrument. It's a completely free, tasty little kick instrument. You really can just head to the ToyBox site and grab it for nothing. Just don't forget to add a discount code for extra savings. But after this unconventional and creative review detour, let's get back to our unconventional and creative synth. Unlike a classic FM synth, FM Zone doesn't just serve up your typical stack of sine waves. It really stretches its legs with a bunch of special operator types, including stuff like additive, supersaws, wavetables, and even physical modeling. So far, so West Coast. But the best thing about this system is that rather than needing to manually program FM Zone's 4 operators to change the core sound, I can simply browse from hundreds of preset configurations for the operators. I can also randomize them completely, or even just change them a little bit, also randomly. The whole thing is perfect for total synth beginners. Or if you're the kind of studio megalomaniac who needs total control of your FM, ToyBox have you covered too. Just click this little pencil here, and then you have your total control of FM Zone's 4 operators. Now, nothing screams West Coast less than a single synth engine in your instrument. So ToyBox have added a second engine, a sample engine, for layering over the FM engine. This one's pretty simple in itself, but actually adds massive depth to the instrument and the patches. With hundreds of samples to choose from, you can add weight, punch, attack, and a range of other qualities to your patches. You can even load up your own samples into this second engine. And speaking of layers, another FM Zone feature that deserves a quick special mention is that sub-oscillator I mentioned earlier. There are currently 14 different sub-oscillators to choose from. In addition to adding a meaty dose of beef to any patch you like, they can also be used to further modulate the main operators, and even modulate things like the synth engine's pitch, the filter cutoffs, or both, all of which is so West Coast you can almost hear the Pacific waves lapping around your speakers. I should also mention the FX section in FM Zone. It's pretty basic, but it sounds good and offers probably just the right amount of choice, with a selection of reverbs, delays, modulation effects, and some distortion options. I've never really been a fan of onboard effects on synths anyway. The last key feature of FM Zone we need to cover is the envelope system. And if I had to describe it, well, let's just say it would have to drive a long way to get to New York. So, remember those 9 knob sections we looked at earlier? As we said, each has its own modulation envelope, and these are loop-based, which is really cool. You can draw them in manually, or select from nearly 60 themed preset shapes. You can even randomize, mutate, flip, reverse, and copy-paste and save them. The envelope system is really powerful, but easy to use and typical of what makes FM Zone such a fun and intuitive synth. Not only that, but these envelopes can be set to trigger and sync to your project in a variety of different ways. This combination of re-triggering and looping options does add to the sense that FM Zone is just a bit more inviting and creative than your average FM synth. But I've raved on about FM Zone a lot already. Are there any negatives? Probably the only thing to note is this is one thirsty plugin, and it will chug CPU cycles for days. And the effect this has on performance and usability seems to be a bit of a system lottery. On my Mac Studio M2 Ultra, one of the most powerful machines Apple has ever made, I regularly hit 30% on Ableton Live CPU meter, sometimes even with a buffer of 1024 samples. And when I tried to run this little baby on the last of the Intel MacBook Airs, an Intel i7 model from 2019, they really didn't get along at all. FM Zone is unplayable unless the polyphony is set to 1 and the buffer to 1024 samples. But then, it's a different story on a MacBook Pro M1, which also shows about 30%, but plays without any audio glitching at all, even down at a buffer setting of 64 samples. Likewise, another Intel Mac I tried. The age or specs of your machine don't actually seem to be a great predictor of any issues. So, that's FM Zone. If you get the sense we've only scratched the surface, trust that instinct. This thing isn't just creative, it's powerful. Sure, despite the many and varied operator types, it's still an FM synth. So it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all studio workhorse for all your synth needs. But if you like these kinds of sounds, you're going to find a lot of track starting inspiration, alongside some iconic patches. Just remember, it is currently problematically CPU intensive on 2 of the systems I tried it on. For the low price of $32, you might think this is a gamble worth taking. And maybe it is. Just be sure you go in with your eyes open. And maybe don't expect to make this first released version the centerpiece of your live show just yet.